The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with voices from a dozen different species, but today the sound carried something new: relief. Ambassador Daeho Kim stood at the human podium for what everyone knew would be the last time. His dark eyes swept across the circular chamber, taking in the faces that had grown familiar over his 10 years of service. The Veltari, with their scaled green skin, sat rigid in their seats, their reptilian faces showing the closest thing to satisfaction their species could manage. The Zephyrians hummed in unison, their collective consciousness pleased with the day's proceedings. Even the energy beings called Luminary pulsed with brighter colors than usual. "The human delegation acknowledges the Council's decision," Daeho said, his voice calm and steady. He had practiced these words many times, knowing this day would come. "We will comply with the expulsion decree and remove all human presence from Council space within the agreed time frame." Council Speaker Veltar rose from the central platform, his massive form casting shadows across the lower seats. The ancient Veltari had led the Council for over 2 centuries, and his scaled face showed deep satisfaction. "The Council appreciates humanity's cooperation in this matter," he said, his voice carrying the authority of ages. "Your species has contributed much to our civilization, but the time has come for separate paths." Daeho nodded once, a gesture that seemed to accept the inevitable. Around him, the other human representatives gathered their belongings with quiet dignity. There were no protests, no angry speeches, no last desperate attempts to change minds. The humans simply accepted their fate with the same calm that had marked their entire presence in the galaxy. But if the Council members had looked closer, they might have noticed something in the way Admiral Sujin Park smiled. She sat in the military observer section, her uniform bearing the insignia of the Human Fleet Command. Her smile was small, barely visible, but it carried something that might have worried them. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret. 3 days later, the evacuation began in earnest. Across 17 systems, humans packed their lives into cargo containers and transport ships. On the industrial world of Kepler 442, engineer Woojin Han supervised the dismantling of the massive manufacturing plants that had produced everything from medical equipment to starship components for the past 50 years. The alien workers watched with confusion as the humans carefully packed not just their belongings, but also detailed blueprints, manufacturing specifications, and even the specialized tools they had developed. "Why do they take so much?" asked a young Veltari supervisor, watching as Wu Jin directed the loading of what appeared to be an entire research laboratory onto a cargo vessel. His superior, an older Veltari named Kexdar, shrugged his scaled shoulders. "Humans are sentimental creatures. They probably want to remember their time here." Neither of them noticed that Wu Jin had heard every word. His expression remained neutral as he continued his work, but internally he smiled. If only they knew what those sentimental items really were. On the agricultural world of Haven 7, Min-Soo Lee worked with the local Zephyrian collective to transfer control of the farming operations. The Zephyrians, who thought as one unified mind, found human individualism disturbing and were glad to see them go. But they valued the efficiency of human farming techniques and wanted to continue using them. "The growing cycles are documented here," Min-Soo explained, handing over what appeared to be a simple data pad. "The seed varieties, soil treatments, and harvest schedules. Everything you need to maintain production." The Zephyrian drones accepted the information eagerly, their shared consciousness absorbing the knowledge instantly. They did not notice that the data pad contained far more than farming information. Hidden within the agricultural data were detailed maps of Zephyrian communication networks, population centers, and industrial capabilities. Information that might prove useful someday. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out on hundreds of worlds. Humans quietly gathered their belongings, said polite goodbyes to alien neighbors, and boarded the great arc ships that would carry them beyond the galactic rim. To outside observers, it looked like any other mass migration. Orderly, peaceful, and final. But hidden within the exodus was something else entirely. In the depths of the arc ships, cargo holds contained more than household goods and personal belongings. Advanced manufacturing equipment, research materials, and experimental technologies filled the storage bays. The humans were not just leaving. They were taking their entire industrial and scientific base with them. So-young Kim stood on the observation deck of the Ark ship New Horizon as it prepared to depart from the core world of Centauri Prime. Behind her, the last group of human. Families settled into their quarters, children pressed against windows to watch their old home fade away. But So-young's attention was focused on something else entirely. Her fingers moved quickly across a small device, downloading the final pieces of data from the planet's communication network. She was not officially part of any government organization. Her records listed her as a cultural attaché, someone who helped preserve human traditions and customs. But So-young's real job was information gathering, and she had spent 5 years building a complete picture of Council military capabilities, trade routes, and political structures. Now, as the last human ships prepared to leave Council space, that information was finally complete. Admiral Soo-jin Park commanded the evacuation fleet from the bridge of her flagship, the Determination. 300 ships of various sizes followed her lead, carrying nearly 2 million humans toward an uncertain future beyond the galactic boundary. The Council had given them detailed star charts showing the safest route out of known space, along with supplies and fuel for the journey. On the surface, it seemed like a generous gesture. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving final clearance from Council Space Control. They're wishing us safe travels." Soo-jin nodded, her expression unreadable. "Send our thanks. Tell them we appreciate their generosity and hope for peaceful relations in the future." The message was transmitted across all frequencies, a final diplomatic courtesy before humanity disappeared into the unknown. But as the great fleet moved beyond the last Council monitoring station, Soo-jin's expression changed. The diplomatic mask fell away, replaced by something harder and more determined. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "Begin Phase 1 of the diaspora. Protocol." Across the evacuation fleet, hidden systems came online. What had appeared to be simple cargo vessels revealed their true nature as advanced construction ships. Manufacturing plants that had been carefully disassembled were already being rebuilt in the modified holds of the Ark ships. The exodus was not an ending, but a beginning. On the bridge of the New Horizon, Captain Hyejin Choi received the signal and smiled. She had been waiting 3 years for this moment. Her ship carried not just refugees, but also some of humanity's most advanced research teams. While the Council thought they were getting rid of a problem, they had actually freed humanity from the restrictions and limitations of living within their conservative society. "Set course for the void," Hyejin ordered. "Time to see what we can build when no one is watching." Behind them, Council space grew smaller and smaller until it was just another cluster of stars in the distance. The galaxy's oldest and most stable, civilization continued its ordered existence, confident that they had solved their human problem once and for all. They had no idea that they had just made the biggest mistake in their long history. The last human ship crossed the galactic boundary at exactly 23:47 hours. Ship time. As it disappeared into the dark space between galaxies, automated monitoring systems throughout Council space registered a series of minor anomalies. Nothing serious, just small glitches in routine operations that would be noticed and corrected by maintenance crews in the morning. None of the Council species realized that those tiny glitches were actually the first signs of something much larger. Something that would grow in the darkness beyond their borders, building strength and capability while they slept peacefully in their beds, secure in the knowledge that the unpredictable humans were gone forever. 3 years had passed since the human ships disappeared beyond the galactic rim, and the Galactic Council had never been more prosperous. Trade flowed smoothly along established routes, diplomatic disputes were resolved through proper channels, and the expansion into formerly human-controlled territories proceeded exactly according to plan. Council Speaker Veltar stood before the Great Assembly, his scaled features showing deep satisfaction as he delivered his annual address. "Fellow beings of the Council," he began, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the hall, "we have achieved something remarkable. For 1,000 years, we have maintained peace and order throughout our galaxy. The last 3 years have proven that our decision regarding the human question was correct. Order has replaced chaos, predictability has replaced uncertainty, and prosperity has replaced the constant disruptions that mark the human era." The assembled representatives from dozens of species nodded their agreement. The Veltari delegation sat in perfect rows, their disciplined posture reflecting their species' love of order. The Zephyrian collective hummed in harmonious approval, their shared consciousness united in satisfaction. Even the usually aloof Luminari pulsed with brighter energy patterns, indicating their pleasure with the current state of affairs. Economic Minister Quindal took the podium next, his four arms, gesturing enthusiastically as he presented the latest trade figures. Production efficiency is up 18% across all sectors, he announced. Resource allocation has improved by 23%. Supply chain disruptions have decreased to their lowest levels in recorded history. The removal of human unpredictability from our economic systems has created an unprecedented era of stability. In the audience, a figure that appeared to be a junior Veltari bureaucrat nodded along with the others. His scaled skin looked perfectly authentic. His posture matched that of his colleagues, and his identification credentials had passed every security check for the past 2 years. But Min-Su Lee was not a Veltari, despite what his genetics might suggest to casual observation. The extensive modifications that had changed his appearance and body chemistry had been painful and dangerous, but they had been worth it. He now sat in the heart of council government, documenting every decision, every policy change, and every military development. The genetic modifications had been experimental when he volunteered for the program. Human scientists had worked for decades to understand alien biology well enough to create convincing disguises. Min-Su had been one of only 12 volunteers who survived the process. The others had died horribly as their bodies rejected the alien genetic material. But those who survived became something new, something that could pass undetected among the species that had expelled humanity from the galaxy. As the economic presentations continued, Min-Su carefully memorized the production figures and trade route data. His modified brain could store vast amounts of information without any external recording devices. Tonight, he would transmit everything to the hidden communication array he had built in his apartment's ventilation system. The signal would bounce off a series of relay stations hidden in asteroids and abandoned space platforms, eventually reaching receivers far beyond the galactic rim. On the industrial world of Nexus 9, another hidden human went about her daily work with quiet efficiency. Hyojin Choi had not needed genetic modification to hide among the Zephyrians. Instead, she had undergone an even more dangerous procedure, allowing alien quantum consciousness implants to be grafted into her brain. The implants let her connect to the Zephyrian collective mind, sharing thoughts and sensations with millions of other beings across the galaxy. The Zephyrians believed she was one of their own, a production supervisor who had always been part of the collective. They did not know that her human consciousness remained separate and hidden, observing their shared thoughts while contributing just enough to maintain her cover. Through the collective network, Hyejin had access to every Zephyrian military base, every communication relay, and every strategic planning session. Production targets for this quarter have been exceeded, she reported to the local collective node, her thoughts flowing seamlessly into the shared consciousness. Raw materials from the former human sectors are being processed efficiently. Quality control remains at optimal levels. The collective accepted her report without question, adding it to the vast stream of information that flowed constantly through their shared mind. They did not notice that Hyejin was carefully mapping every node in their network, identifying critical points and backup systems. Her human training in cybernetics and network analysis let her understand the collective's architecture in ways that its own members never could. At the same time, So Young Kim worked openly in her official role as a trade liaison between different council species. Her credentials were completely legitimate, and her work helping to coordinate resource transfers between worlds was genuinely valuable. The council valued her analytical skills and attention to detail, never suspecting that those same skills were being used to map their entire economic and military infrastructure. The shipping manifests for this month show increased demand for rare earth minerals, she reported to the Trade Commission. I recommend adjusting the extraction quotas on these worlds to meet projected needs. She highlighted several star systems on the large holographic display, each one carefully chosen for strategic importance rather than economic necessity. The Commission approved her recommendations without debate. So Young had built a reputation for excellent judgment over the past 3 years. Her suggestions always seemed to improve efficiency and reduce costs. They did not realize that she was also carefully documenting which worlds produced critical resources, which shipping routes were most vulnerable to disruption, and which facilities would be most damaging to lose in a hypothetical conflict. While the hidden operatives gathered intelligence, the visible success of council policies created a sense of invincibility among the leadership. Security Chief Thex delivered his own report to the Assembly, his insectoid features clicking with satisfaction. Criminal activity has decreased by 31% since the human departure, he announced. Unauthorized technological development has virtually ceased. The unpredictable elements that once disrupted our society have been eliminated. The security reports painted a picture of perfect order. Crime rates had indeed fallen, but mostly because human entrepreneurs were no longer creating gray market technologies that confused legal definitions. Unauthorized research had stopped, but that was because humans had been responsible for most of the experimental work that pushed boundaries. The galaxy was safer and more predictable, exactly as the Council had hoped. But on the outer rim of Council space, automated mining stations had begun reporting strange readings. The sensors were detecting massive energy signatures from beyond the galactic boundary, patterns that suggested large-scale industrial activity in the void between galaxies. The reports were filed with routine maintenance logs and mostly ignored by busy administrators who had more immediate concerns. Station Manager Colvex reviewed the weekly sensor reports with growing confusion. His mining operation on the edge of the Kepler sector had been registering unusual readings for several months now. The computers keep detecting structured energy patterns about 40 light-years past the boundary, he told his assistant. But there's nothing out there except empty space. His assistant, a young luminary named Flux 7, pulsed with dim curiosity. Perhaps the sensors need recalibration. The equipment is quite old. Colvex nodded, filing the reports with a note to schedule maintenance. It never occurred to either of them that the readings might be real, or that something was indeed building in the darkness beyond their sensors' maximum range. The Council's faith in the emptiness of intergalactic space was absolute. Nothing could survive out there, let alone build industrial facilities capable of generating such massive energy signatures. Similar reports came in from other rim stations, but they were all dismissed as sensor malfunctions or natural phenomena. The Council's scientific community had long ago established that the void between galaxies was completely lifeless and uninhabitable. The idea that anyone could not only survive out there but actually thrive was so far outside their understanding that they simply refused to consider it. Meanwhile, War Minister Velnox presented his own assessment of Council military strength to the Assembly. Our defensive capabilities have never been stronger, he declared. The integration of former human territories has expanded our strategic depth. Our fleet numbers have increased by 15% through more efficient resource allocation. Most importantly, our forces now operate with unprecedented coordination and predictability. The military reports showed impressive numbers. Thousands of ships patrolled Council space. Advanced defense platforms protected every major world, and sophisticated early warning systems monitored all approaches to their territory. The removal of human unpredictability from their military doctrine had indeed improved coordination and reduced friendly fire incidents. Everything operated according to carefully planned protocols and established procedures. The first crack in the Council's perfect order appeared on a routine patrol mission near the Galactic Rim. Captain Mortex commanded the patrol vessel Steadfast, a modern Veltari cruiser equipped with the latest scanning technology and manned by a crew of 43 beings from 6 different species. Their mission was simple: investigate the continuing sensor anomalies reported by mining stations in the outer sectors. Sir, we're approaching the coordinates where Station Kappa 7 detected those energy readings, reported the navigation officer, a young Zephyrian whose connection to the collective provided excellent spatial awareness. Long-range sensors are showing normal readings. No artificial structures detected. Mortex studied the display screens with growing frustration. For months now, his ship had been sent to investigate these mysterious readings, and they never found anything concrete. The outer rim mining stations kept reporting massive energy signatures from beyond the galactic boundary, but Council ships found only empty space. Some of his colleagues had begun suggesting that the old equipment on those remote stations was simply malfunctioning. "Take us to the edge of our patrol zone," Mortex ordered. "Full sensor sweep. If there's something out there, we're going to find it. The Steadfast moved smoothly through space, its powerful engines pushing it toward the very edge of Council territory. Behind them, the lights of civilization grew dim and distant. Ahead lay the vast emptiness between galaxies, a region that Council science had long ago declared lifeless and uninhabitable. At exactly 13:47 hours ship time, something changed. The sensor officer, a multi-limbed arachnid named Click Tar, suddenly straightened in her station. "Captain, I'm reading massive artificial structures approximately 37 light-years beyond the boundary. The energy signatures are unprecedented." Mortex moved quickly to the sensor station, his scaled hands working the controls with practiced efficiency. The display showed what appeared to be a cluster of artificial objects, each one larger than a space station. But as he watched, the readings flickered and vanished, leaving only empty space. "Did you record that?" he asked urgently. "Yes, sir, but the recording shows only background radiation. Whatever interfered with our sensors also corrupted the data storage systems." For the next 6 hours, the Steadfast remained at the edge of Council space, conducting detailed scans and launching sensor probes toward the mysterious readings. But they found nothing concrete, only occasional glimpses of massive structures that vanished whenever they tried to get detailed readings. The crew grew increasingly nervous as the hours passed without explanation. Then, at 19:23 hours, everything went wrong. The attack came without warning and from an impossible direction. One moment, the Steadfast was alone in empty space, conducting routine scans. The next moment, weapons fire erupted from the apparently empty void ahead of them. But these were not any weapons the Council had ever seen. The energy beams seemed to bend space itself, passing through the ship's shields as if they were not there. "Evasive action!" Mortex shouted, but it was already too late. The unknown weapons struck with surgical precision, disabling engines and communication systems while leaving life support intact. Within minutes, the Steadfast was dead in space, its crew trapped and helpless. A massive shape materialized out of the darkness ahead of them, its hull black as space itself and covered in what appeared to be advanced stealth coating. The vessel was larger than anything in the Council fleet, its design unlike any known starship architecture, and from its bridge, a familiar voice spoke across open communication channels. "Council vessel Steadfast, this is Fleet Commander Jinwoo Nam of the Human Expeditionary Force. Your ship has been disabled but not destroyed. Your crew will be transferred to an escape pod and return to Council space with a message. You were warned once to leave us in peace. This is your second warning. There will not be a third." The Council crew watched in shock as boarding pods attached to their hull and human soldiers in advanced combat suits moved through their ship with deadly efficiency. But the humans did not kill or harm anyone. Instead, they gathered the crew into the ship's main cargo bay and began preparing emergency evacuation pods. Mortex found himself face to face with the human commander, a woman whose cold eyes seemed to look right through him. "I know you," she said calmly. "Captain Mortex of the 3rd Patrol Squadron. You served with distinction during the Krillian border conflict. Your crew will be unharmed, but your ship and its sensor logs will be destroyed." "How do you know about my service record?" Mortex asked, his voice betraying his confusion. The human woman smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. "We know everything about you, Captain. We know about your patrol routes, your ship's capabilities, your crew's training, and your orders. We've been watching Council space for 3 years, gathering information and preparing for our return. Within an hour, the entire Council crew was secured in emergency pods and launched toward the nearest inhabited system. Behind them, the Steadfast vanished in a brief flash of light, completely vaporized by weapons that left no trace of debris. The only evidence of their encounter was a message beacon floating in space, broadcasting 4 words in human script. "You were warned once." The loss of the Steadfast sent shockwaves through Council military command. Investigation teams were dispatched immediately, but they found only the message beacon and empty space. Long-range sensors detected no trace of human ships or installations. It was as if the attackers had simply vanished back into the void, but more ships began to disappear. Council patrols sent to investigate the outer rim mining stations simply failed to return. Search and rescue missions found only debris fields and message beacons carrying increasingly ominous warnings. The humans were out there in the darkness, and they were no longer hiding their presence. In the Council Intelligence Headquarters, Investigation Team Leader Mortex worked frantically to piece together what was happening. His experience as the sole survivor of the steadfast attack had made him the Council's leading expert on the human threat, a position he had never wanted. The reports flowing across his desk painted a picture that terrified him. "The pattern is clear," he told the assembled intelligence officers. "Human forces are conducting reconnaissance missions along our entire outer perimeter. They're testing our response times, mapping our patrol routes, and gathering detailed intelligence on our defensive capabilities. This is not random piracy or isolated incidents. This is preparation for invasion." Security Chief Thex dismissed his concerns with typical bureaucratic confidence. "Impossible. Our intelligence assets within former human space report no massive military buildup. If the humans were preparing for war, we would know about it." What Thex did not know was that his intelligence assets were either dead or providing false information, under human control. The network of spies and informants that the Council had cultivated in human space had been systematically identified and neutralized within months of the Exodus. The humans had always known who was watching them, and they had used that knowledge to feed false information back to Council intelligence. Meanwhile, the hidden operatives within Council space began to activate dormant programs and planted software throughout the government and military networks. Minsu Lee, still maintaining his cover as a Veltari bureaucrat, had spent 3 years carefully placing logic bombs and backdoor access codes throughout the Council's computer systems. Now, as tensions began to rise, those hidden programs started their work. Military communication networks began experiencing random delays and message corruption. Supply chain management systems developed subtle errors that resulted in critical materials being diverted to less important facilities. Personnel, databases were quietly altered, causing confusion in unit assignments and command structures. The changes were small and seemingly random, but they had a cumulative effect of reducing Council military efficiency just when it was needed most. Ye-Jin Choi, still connected to the Zephyrian collective consciousness, began introducing false memories and corrupted data into their shared knowledge base. The collective pride itself on perfect information sharing, but human understanding of their neural networks allowed Ye-Jin to plant ideas and information that seemed to come from within their own minds. Gradually, the collective began to develop blind spots and false assumptions about human capabilities and intentions. So-Young Kim continued her legitimate work as a trade liaison, but now her recommendations carried a different purpose. She began subtly redirecting critical resources away from military applications and toward civilian projects. Her reputation for excellent judgment meant that her suggestions were rarely questioned, allowing her to quietly weaken Council defensive preparations, while appearing to strengthen their economy. The Outer Rim colonies reported increasingly disturbing sightings. Massive structures moving in the darkness between stars, glimpsed only briefly before vanishing again. Ships the size of space stations, their hulls black as the void and covered with technology that bent light around them. The reports were consistent, enough to be disturbing, but inconsistent enough to be dismissed by skeptical administrators in the core worlds. The moment that changed everything began with a routine sensor sweep by the long-range monitoring station at Terminus Point, the farthest outpost of Council space. Senior Technician Velcris was conducting his weekly check of the deep space sensors, when the readings made him stop breathing. The displays showed not one or two mysterious contacts, but hundreds of them, moving in perfect formation toward the galactic rim. "Supervisor Kexdar, you need to see this immediately," Velcris called, his voice shaking with disbelief. Supervisor Kexdar moved quickly to the sensor station, her 4 eyes focusing on the impossible readings. The deep space array was detecting a massive fleet approaching from intergalactic space, their energy signatures unlike anything in Council databases. But these ships were not trying to hide anymore. They moved openly through space, their presence radiating power and confidence. "How many vessels?" Kexdar asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "Initial count shows 307 distinct contacts, but some of these readings are enormous. Several ships appear to be larger than our biggest space stations. And Supervisor, their technology is generating energy patterns that our computers can't even classify." The news reached Council headquarters within hours, transmitted through the fastest communication channels available. Emergency sessions were Called military commanders were summoned from across the galaxy, and intelligence analysts worked frantically to understand what they were facing. But nothing in their experience had prepared them for the reality of what the humans had become. Council Speaker Veltar stood before the emergency assembly, his ancient features showing strain for the first time in decades. Fellow council members, we face an unprecedented situation. The human fleet that departed our space 3 years ago has returned, but they are no longer the same beings who left. Our best intelligence estimates suggest they have developed technologies far beyond anything in our databases. The chamber erupted in voices as representatives from dozens of species tried to make sense of the situation. How could a refugee fleet of defeated humans return as a technological superpower? Where had they acquired such advanced capabilities? And most importantly, what did they want? Admiral Colt Thanor, Supreme Commander of Council Defense Forces, took the podium with grim determination. Our military analysis indicates that while the human fleet is technologically advanced, they are still vastly outnumbered. We have over 8,000 combat vessels available for deployment, along with fixed defenses around every major world. Whatever they have learned in exile, they cannot overcome such overwhelming numerical superiority. But even as the Admiral spoke with confidence, his private doubts were growing. The intelligence reports from the Outer Rim painted a picture of technology that seemed to ignore the known laws of physics. Human ships that could phase through solid matter, weapons that bent space-time itself, and defensive systems that made their vessels virtually invisible to conventional sensors. How could 3 years in exile have produced such impossible advances? The answer came when the human fleet reached the galactic boundary and broadcast their demands across all communication frequencies. The transmission appeared simultaneously on every screen, speaker, and communication device throughout Council space, bypassing all security systems and encryption protocols as if they simply did not exist. Fleet Admiral Soo-Jin Park appeared on the screens, her uniform bearing insignia that no Council observer recognized. Behind her, the bridge of her flagship showed technology that seemed more like art than engineering, with holographic displays and control systems that bent light and energy in impossible ways. "People of the Galactic Council," she began, her voice carrying clearly despite transmission across thousands of light years. 3 years ago, you expelled humanity from this galaxy because you found us unpredictable, chaotic, and dangerous. You were correct in that assessment. We are all of those things, and our exile has made us more so, not less. The transmission continued as Admiral Soo-Jin walked through her ship, revealing glimpses of technology that made Council engineers gasp in disbelief. Crew members worked at stations that seemed to respond to thought rather than touch, while weapons, systems charged with energies that created visible distortions in space-time itself. During our exile, we encountered species and technologies that you never imagined could exist. We learned from civilizations that transcended the physical limitations you accept as absolute. We built alliances with beings who taught us to manipulate the fundamental forces of reality itself. You cast us into the void, thinking it was empty, but the void was full of wonders that you never discovered because you never dared to look. The transmission shifted to show massive construction facilities floating in the darkness between galaxies, their scale dwarfing anything the Council had ever built. Ships emerged from orbital dry docks like cities in space, their hulls incorporating materials that seemed to phase in and out of normal space-time. Research stations studied phenomena that existed only in the strange physics of intergalactic space, where the normal rules of reality became flexible suggestions. "But we have not returned for conquest," Admiral Soo-Jin continued, her image returning to the screen. "We have returned for justice. You judged us unworthy of galactic citizenship, based on fear and prejudice. You expelled an entire species because we did not conform to your narrow definition of acceptable behavior. That was your choice, and now you must face the consequences." The transmission paused, and for a moment the only sound throughout Council space was the hum of machinery and the whispered prayers of beings who were beginning to understand the magnitude of their situation. Then Admiral Soo-Jin spoke again, her voice carrying a finality that chilled listeners across the galaxy. "You have 72 standard hours to respond to our terms. The Council leadership will surrender themselves for trial before an impartial tribunal. Your military forces will stand down and allow human inspectors to verify compliance. Your species will accept permanent human oversight to ensure that no other race is subjected to the prejudice and exile that you imposed on us. If you refuse these terms, we will demonstrate why you were right to fear human unpredictability." The transmission ended, leaving the council leadership in stunned silence. The terms were completely unacceptable, tantamount to total surrender before a single shot had been fired. But the alternative was a war against technology they did not understand, wielded by humans who had apparently transcended the limitations. That bound the rest of galactic civilization. Emergency military conferences were called throughout Council space as commanders tried to develop strategies for fighting an enemy that seemed to possess impossible capabilities. But how do you fight ships that can phase through solid matter? How do you target vessels that bend light around themselves? How do you defend against weapons that ignore shields and armor by altering the fundamental forces that hold matter together? Supreme. Commander Kolthanor worked frantically with his staff to develop battle plans, but every scenario ended in disaster. "Their technology makes conventional tactics useless," he admitted to his assembled officers. "We need new approaches, new weapons, new strategies. Send orders to all research facilities. Priority authorization for any experimental technologies that might level the playing field." But while the Council military scrambled to understand the threat they faced, the human sleeper agents throughout their society began their final preparations. Min-Su Lee, still maintaining his cover as a Veltari bureaucrat, activated the logic bombs and backdoor programs he had planted throughout Council computer networks over the past 3 years. Military communication systems began experiencing systematic failures, supply chains were disrupted, and critical information was redirected or delayed at crucial moments. Hyojin Choi, connected to the Zephyrian collective consciousness, began introducing massive amounts of false information and corrupted data into their shared knowledge base. The collective, which prided itself on perfect information sharing, suddenly found itself unable to distinguish between real intelligence and carefully crafted disinformation. Their famous unity of thought became a weakness as poisoned ideas spread through their entire network. So Young Kim abandoned all pretense of her trade liaison role and began systematically disrupting Council supply lines and resource allocation. Her 3 years of mapping critical infrastructure now paid dividends, as she orchestrated strikes against key facilities that would cripple the Council's ability to maintain their military forces. Fuel depots were sabotaged, ammunition factories were shut down by false safety alerts, and transport networks were overloaded with false priority orders. But perhaps the most devastating revelation came when the Council leadership discovered that their most trusted intelligence assets had been compromised for years. The spy networks that had provided them with such confidence in their security were either dead or working for the humans. Every military plan, every defensive strategy, every secret weapon project had been observed and reported to human intelligence for months or years. War Minister Velnox stood before the Emergency Defense Council, his usual confidence completely shattered. "Our entire strategic planning process has been compromised. The war began and ended in the span of 6 hours. At exactly 0001 hours, Council Standard Time, the human fleet crossed into galactic space with a demonstration of power that redefined the meaning of warfare. The first target was Fortress Prime, the Council's most heavily defended military installation, a massive space station surrounded by defensive platforms and protected by a fleet of 300 warships. It was considered absolutely impregnable by Council military strategists. The attack came from 12 human vessels that appeared to materialize out of empty space, their stealth systems dropping away to reveal ships whose very presence distorted the fabric of reality around them. But instead of opening fire immediately, the lead vessel transmitted a message that was heard simultaneously on every communication device in the system. Council forces at Fortress Prime. This is Grand Admiral Dae-Ho Kim of the Human Liberation Fleet. You have 30 seconds to power down your weapons and surrender. This is your only warning." The Council commander, Admiral Thekvar, responded with typical military arrogance. "Human vessels, you are outnumbered 25-1 and facing the most advanced defensive installation in the galaxy. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." 29 seconds later, the human ships opened fire. The weapons they used defied every principle of known physics. Energy beams that phased through shields as if they were not there, striking the hulls of Council ships and somehow rewriting the molecular structure of their armor from the inside out. Defensive platforms simply ceased to exist, not destroyed by explosion, but somehow edited out of reality itself. The massive Fortress Prime station, which had withstood attacks from entire fleets, was reduced to its component atoms in less than 3 minutes. But most terrifying of all was the precision. No escape pods were harmed. No civilian vessels were touched. The human weapons struck only military targets with surgical accuracy, disabling or destroying exactly what they intended while leaving everything else completely untouched. It was a demonstration of control that was more frightening than any display of raw destructive power. Supreme Commander Colthanor watched the battle from the Strategic Command Center on the Council homeworld, his multiple hearts racing as the tactical displays showed the impossible. "How are they doing this?" he demanded of his technical staff. "Our shields should stop any energy weapon. Our armor can withstand direct hits from antimatter warheads. How are they cutting through our defenses like they're not even there?" Chief Scientist Dr. Velmira studied the sensor readings with growing horror. "Admiral, I don't think these are conventional weapons at all. The energy signatures suggest they're somehow manipulating the fundamental forces that hold matter together. They're not breaking through our defenses. They're convincing our defenses that they don't exist." Across Council space, similar scenes played out as human ships struck military targets with devastating effectiveness. But the physical attacks were only part of the assault. At the same moment the shooting began, the sleeper agents activated their final programs, and Council civilization began to collapse from within. Min-Soo Lee, his genetic disguise no longer necessary, stood in the central computer core of the Council government complex and watched as 3 years of careful sabotage bore fruit. Every military communication network crashed simultaneously. Supply databases were corrupted beyond recovery. Personnel files were scrambled, leaving commanders unable to contact their units or coordinate any kind of organized response. "You should have treated us as equals," he said quietly to the Veltari security officers who had finally discovered his true identity. "We offered you friendship and cooperation. Instead, you chose fear and exile. This is the result of that choice." In the Zephyrian collective consciousness, Heejin Choi unleashed a final wave of corrupted data that shattered their shared mind into millions of confused fragments. The species that had prided itself on perfect unity suddenly found themselves unable to think as one, their collective consciousness reduced to chaos and noise. Individual Zephyrians across the galaxy collapsed as their neural implants overloaded, trying to process contradictory information that made no logical sense. So-Young Kim stood in the Council's primary economic coordination center, watching as the carefully orchestrated supply chain collapses reached their climax. Fuel depots exploded in perfectly timed sequences, manufacturing facilities shut down as their automated systems received contradictory orders. Transportation networks ground to a halt as traffic control computers crashed simultaneously across dozens of star systems. But the most devastating blow came from an unexpected source. As the human fleet moved deeper into Council space, they were joined by allies that no Council observer had ever seen before. Ships of impossible design emerged from what appeared to be empty space, their hulls composed of materials that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. These were the beings that humanity had encountered in the intergalactic void, species so advanced that the Council had never even detected their existence. Council forces, this is Fleet Admiral Soo-Jin Park. You are now facing not just humanity, but our allies from beyond your galactic borders. The Ethereals, the Voidwalkers, and the Dimension Shapers have agreed to assist us in ensuring that your prejudice and fear never again determine the fate of an entire species. The Allied ships moved through space, using technologies that made even the advanced human vessels look primitive by comparison. They traveled by folding space-time around themselves, making distance and conventional physics irrelevant. Their weapons reached across star systems to strike targets with perfect accuracy, while their defenses existed in dimensions that Council sensors could not even detect. Dr. Velmira stared at the sensor readings in complete disbelief. These energy patterns are impossible. They're using technologies that manipulate dimensions we don't even know exist. How did the humans find such allies? How did they even make contact with beings this advanced? The answer came in a transmission from Grand Admiral Dae-ho Kim as his flagship approached the Council homeworld. You exiled us to the void thinking it was empty and lifeless. But the void between galaxies is where the truly advanced civilizations choose to live, far from the noise and chaos of galactic politics. When we arrived as refugees, they took pity on us. When we told them how we had been treated, they offered to help us return as equals rather than exiles. The transmission showed glimpses of the vast cities that existed in intergalactic space, structures that spanned light years and housed civilizations millions of years old. Beings of pure energy worked alongside humans in research facilities that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously. Ancient entities that had transcended physical form shared their knowledge with human scientists eager to learn and adapt. You see, the galaxy is not the center of the universe as you believed. It is a backwater, isolated from the true centers of knowledge and power. Your species never discovered this because you never had the courage to leave your safe, predictable borders. You chose order and stagnation over exploration and growth. That is why you will never be ready for the responsibilities of true galactic leadership. As human and allied forces swept aside the remnants of Council military resistance, the political leadership faced the reality of total defeat. Council Speaker Veltar stood in his private chambers, watching through the great windows as human ships took position around the homeworld. Their hulls gleamed with technologies that bent light around them, making them appear like mirages against the star field. A communication request came from the human flagship, and Veltar accepted it with the resignation of someone who had run out of options. Grand Admiral Dae-ho Kim appeared on the screen, his expression calm but implacable. Speaker Veltar, your military forces have been neutralized, and your infrastructure has been secured. We are prepared to accept your surrender and begin the transition to a new galactic order. Veltar's scaled features showed the weight of centuries, of leadership, and the bitter taste of absolute defeat. What you have done here today is impossible. Your species was barely spacefaring when we first encountered you. How did you achieve such technological superiority in only 3 years? Dae-ho's expression softened slightly, showing a hint of the man who had once served as humanity's ambassador to this very council. Speaker, you made the same mistake that powerful civilizations have made throughout history. You assumed that your way was the only way, that your level of advancement was the highest possible. But the universe is vast and full of wonders that you never imagined because you never looked beyond your own borders. The image shifted to show the interior of the human flagship, where beings of impossible beauty and complexity worked alongside human crew members. Energy entities that existed as pure thought operated control systems that responded to intention rather than physical touch. Crystalline beings from dimensions beyond normal space-time provided guidance on technologies that manipulated the fundamental structure of reality. When you exiled us, you forced us to seek help from those you never knew existed. The civilizations of intergalactic space have been watching your galaxy for millions of years, waiting for its inhabitants to mature enough for true contact.